The coffee at Rosie's diner had been lukewarm for 20 minutes, but Dorothy Walsh didn't mind. At 78 years old, she'd learned to savor small pleasures slowly. The ceramic mug warmed her arthritic hands, and the window booth gave her a view of the highway, a reminder that the world was still moving, even if she'd mostly stopped. She counted the coins on the table for the third time. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a nickel, 90 cents. The coffee was $1.50 plus tax. She'd need to leave something for a tip. Rosie had always been kind about the small tips, never made her feel like the burden she sometimes worried she was. The bell above the door chimed. Dorothy glanced up out of habit, a reflex from 40 years of working emergency room intake, always watching who came through the doors, always assessing. The man who entered made the small diner feel smaller. He was massive, well over 6 feet, with a leather vest over a worn denim shirt, patches and insignia she didn't understand covering the leather. His boots were heavy on the linoleum. Behind him, through the window, she could see a motorcycle, chrome gleaming even in the gray November afternoon. He took the counter seat 3 down from where Rosie was refilling the coffee station. His hands were scraped, knuckles raw. There was a tiredness in the way he moved, the kind Dorothy recognized from decades of seeing people at their most vulnerable. Not physical exhaustion, something deeper. Rosie approached him with the coffee pot. "What can I get you?" "Just coffee, please." His voice was rough but polite. "Black." Rosie poured, and Dorothy watched him wrap his hands around the mug the same way she'd been holding hers. Seeking warmth, seeking something. He reached for his wallet, then stopped, patted his pockets, checked his vest. His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, and Dorothy heard genuine embarrassment in his voice. I must have left my wallet at the last stop. I can come back, or I can leave my watch as—" "It's just coffee, honey," Rosie said. "Don't worry about it." But Dorothy was already moving. Her hands shook slightly as she gathered the coins from her table, the ones she'd been counting so carefully. She stood, her knees protesting, and walked the few steps to the counter. The man turned as she approached, and she saw his eyes, brown, tired, kind despite the hard exterior. "Here." She placed the coins on the counter next to his mug. 90 cents. Everything she had, except the crumpled $10 bill in her coat pocket. Her last $10 until her Social Security check came in 4 days. The $10 that was supposed to buy bread and milk and maybe, if she was careful, a can of soup. She put the 10 on the counter, too. "For the coffee," she said, "and for whatever else you need." The man stared at the money, then at her. "Ma'am, I can't—" "You can, and you will." Her voice had the firmness of someone who'd spent decades telling people what they needed to hear. Everyone needs help sometimes. No shame in it. She turned and walked back to her booth before he could argue, before he could see that her own hands were shaking not just from arthritis, but from the knowledge of what she'd just done. 4 days until her check. 4 days of nothing but the half box of crackers in her kitchen and the questionable jar of peanut butter that might last one more sandwich. Behind her, she heard Rosie's quiet voice. "That's Dorothy Walsh. She comes in every Wednesday, orders 1 coffee, makes it last 2 hours. That $10 was probably all she had." Dorothy didn't turn around. She gathered her threadbare coat, wrapped it tight against the cold that seemed to live in her bones now, and walked out of the diner into the November afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds that promised snow. Her house was 14 blocks away. She'd walk it like she always did. The bus fare was 75 cents each way, money she couldn't spare. Behind her, through the diner window, Jake Morrison sat frozen at the counter, staring at the $10 bill and the handful of coins. His coffee had gone cold. His hands had stopped shaking from the panic of being stranded without gas money, without anything. But now they shook for a different reason. "Who is she?" he asked Rosie. "Like I said, Dorothy Walsh, widow, lives over on Maple Street in that old Victorian that's falling apart. She was a nurse at County Hospital for 40 years before she retired. Her husband died about 5 years back, cancer. Medical bills took everything they had. She's got nobody now, no kids, some relatives out west somewhere, but they don't come around." Jake picked up the $10 bill, held it like it was something precious. Because it was. He'd seen enough of life, lived rough enough years, to recognize what he'd just witnessed. This wasn't spare change. This was sacrifice. "She gave me everything she had." "That's Dorothy," Rosie said softly. "That's just who she is." Jake Morrison left the diner 20 minutes later with a full tank of gas, paid for by Rosie, who'd called her husband to bring cash from their register at home. But he carried that $10 bill in his vest pocket, pressed against his heart. And he carried something else too, a debt. Not the financial kind, the kind that mattered more. Dorothy's house on Maple Street had been beautiful once. Built in 1924, it was a 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and gingerbread trim. She and Henry had bought it in 1972, when they were young and full of dreams, when 40 years of mortgage payments seemed manageable, when they'd imagined filling the rooms with children who never came. Now the porch sagged. The paint had peeled away years ago, leaving bare wood that weathered to gray. The roof leaked in 3 places. She had buckets positioned in the upstairs bedroom, the hallway, and the back corner of the living room. When it neo-artist rained, the house played a percussion symphony of drips and drops that kept her awake. The furnace was dying. She knew this the way you know anything after living with it long enough. It rattled and coughed, and some mornings it didn't start at all. She'd learned to coax it to life, had learned which pipes to bang on, which valves to jiggle. On the coldest nights, she slept in her coat, under every blanket she owned, in the living room where the space heater could reach. The plumbing was worse. The kitchen sink drained slowly, backing up more often than not. The bathroom toilet ran constantly, unless she jiggled the handle just right. She'd stopped using the upstairs bathroom entirely after the ceiling beneath it started to stain, evidence of a leak she couldn't afford to fix. $847 a month. That's what Social Security gave her. The property taxes took $212. The utilities, gas, electric, water, averaged another $230 in the winter, less in summer. That left $405 for food, medicine, and everything else life required. She'd stopped taking 2 of her medications. The blood pressure pills and the cholesterol medication. Kept only the thyroid medication because without it, she literally couldn't function. That saved her $83 a month. She told herself the pills probably didn't matter much anyway. At 78, what was she preserving herself for? The house was too big for one person. Everyone said so. The social worker who'd visited after Henry died. The distant cousin who'd called once, suggesting she sell it and move into a nice facility. The property assessor who'd come by last year and looked at her with pity when he saw how she was living. But this house held 46 years of memories. Henry's workshop was still in the basement, his tools hung on pegboards exactly where he'd left them. The kitchen still smelled like his coffee in the mornings, even though he'd been gone 5 years. The bedroom upstairs was where they'd loved each other, fought, made up, grown old together. The living room was where he'd died, in the hospital bed the hospice had brought, holding her hand, telling her he was sorry for leaving her with nothing. The medical bills had taken everything. Henry's cancer had been aggressive, and their insurance had been inadequate. Experimental treatments, out-of-network specialists, medications that cost thousands per dose. They'd mortgaged the house, then mortgaged it again, drained their retirement accounts, sold everything of value. And still, he'd died. Dorothy had gone back to work at 73, taking shifts at the hospital until her knees and her back and her heart couldn't take it anymore. She'd paid off the medical debt, every cent. It had taken 3 years and left her with nothing but the house and Social Security. She didn't regret it. The debt had been theirs together. Paying it had been her last act of marriage, her final promise kept. Now she sat in her cold living room on a Wednesday evening in November, 4 days until her check came, with nothing in her stomach but black coffee and the memory of giving away her last $10 to a stranger who'd needed it. And she didn't regret that either. The Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club met every Thursday night at a garage on the industrial side of town. It wasn't much, a converted warehouse with a concrete floor, a few beaten couches, a refrigerator that worked most of the time, and enough space to work on bikes when needed. The 15 members ranged from 24 to 61. They were mechanics and construction workers, a few veterans, one accountant who nobody gave grief about anymore because he'd proven himself 100 times over. Jake Morrison had been club president for 6 years. He'd inherited the role when Reaper died. Heart attack at 59, gone before the ambulance arrived. Jake had never wanted the position, but the club had voted unanimously. Leadership wasn't about wanting it. It was about who you trusted when things went bad. Thursday night, Jake stood in front of the group with Dorothy Walsh's $10 bill in his hand. "I want to tell you about something that happened yesterday," he said. The room quieted. Jake didn't call meetings for nothing. He told them about the diner, about being stranded without his wallet, about the panic of being broke and stuck 50 miles from home, about the elderly woman who'd given him everything she had. "Rosie told me this woman lives on $847 a month. That $10 was probably her food money, and she gave it to me. Didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions, just gave it." He held up the bill. "I want to find out who she is, really is, and I want to know if there's something we can do." Tommy Wrench Patterson spoke up first. He was the club's oldest member at 61, a Vietnam vet with shrapnel still in his leg. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we ride by her place. Just look, see what the situation is, and then we figure it out from there." "You got an address?" This from Carlos, the accountant, already pulling out his phone. "Maple Street, Victorian. Falling apart, according to Rosie." Carlos typed, scrolled, looked up. "Dorothy Walsh, 78, widow. Property records show the house is hers, but there's liens for back taxes. Looks like she's behind about 6 months." "How much?" Jake asked. $1,200? $1,200, a month and a half of her entire income, and she'd given away $10 to help a stranger. "Saturday morning," Jake said, "we ride by, we look, we don't approach, we don't scare her, we just look. Then we talk about what we do next." The vote was unanimous. Saturday morning came cold and clear. 8 motorcycles rolled down Maple Street just after 9 a.m., slow and quiet as bikes could be. They parked 3 houses down, and Jake walked the rest of the way on foot, the others hanging back. The house was worse than he'd imagined. The porch steps were rotted through in places. The roof was visibly sagging. Windows were covered with plastic sheeting, taped from the inside, makeshift insulation against the cold. The gutters hung loose, full of leaves and debris. The yard was overgrown, not from neglect, but from inability. No 78-year-old woman could maintain this alone. Jake walked up carefully, testing each step. Through the front window he could see inside. Furniture from another era. A bucket in the corner, positioned under a stain on the ceiling. And Dorothy Walsh, sitting in a chair with a blanket over her lap, reading a book. She looked up, saw him. Their eyes met through the window. Jake raised his hand in a small wave, non-threatening. She stared for a moment, then recognition crossed her face. The man from the diner. She stood slowly, moved to the door, opened it a crack. "Can I help you?" Her voice was cautious but not afraid. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Morrison, from the diner on Wednesday. You helped me out when I needed it." I remember. I wanted to return your money. He held out a $20 bill. And to thank you properly. She looked at the money, then at him. I don't need thanks, and I don't want repayment. I helped because you needed help. That's all. I know, ma'am, but I'd feel better if you'd take it. Then you'll have to feel worse. I don't take money I didn't earn. She started to close the door. Wait, Jake said. Please, can I ask you something? She paused. Why did you help me? You didn't know me. I probably looked like someone you should avoid. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. I was a nurse for 40 years. Emergency room. I learned to see people, not appearances. You look tired and scared and decent. Those things matter more than leather and tattoos. You gave me everything you had. I gave you what you needed. There's a difference. What if you needed it? I've been poor before. I'll be poor again. But I've never been the kind of person who walks past someone in need. I won't start now. She began closing the door again. Your house is falling apart, Jake said. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. That's my business. You're right, it is. But I'm making it mine too, because you helped me, and now I want to help you. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's what you called it on Wednesday. Everyone needs help sometimes. No shame in it. Dorothy Walsh stared at him through the crack in the door. Her eyes were wet. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to let me do for you what you did for me. Let me help because you need help. That's all. She was quiet for a long time. Behind Jake, the other bikes waited, engines off, men standing in the cold morning air. Finally, Dorothy spoke. What kind of help? The kind that fixes your roof, and your porch, and whatever else needs fixing. Why would you do that? Because 40 years in an emergency room saving lives should count for something. Because you gave your last $10 to a stranger. Because you deserve better than this. He gestured at the sagging porch, the peeling paint. Because I can, and because my club wants to. Your club? Jake turned and gestured. The 7 other men walked forward, stopping at a respectful distance. Tommy with his limp, Carlos with his accounting spreadsheets. Young Marcus, only 24, whose mother had died of an overdose and been revived 3 times by ER nurses. Big Tom, whose daughter was alive because a nurse had recognized sepsis when the doctors missed it. Iron Brotherhood, Jake said. We help each other. We help our community. And we'd like to help you. Dorothy looked at them. At these men society taught her to fear. These men who'd ridden across town on a Saturday morning to stand in the cold and offer help to a stranger. I don't understand, she whispered. You don't have to, Jake said gently. You just have to say yes. The tears came then, silent and steady. Dorothy Walsh, who'd held herself together through 40 years of emergency room trauma, through her husband's death, through 5 years of grinding poverty, finally broke. Yes, she said. Yes, please. I need help. The Iron Brotherhood didn't do anything small. That wasn't their way. When they committed to something, they committed fully. By Monday morning, Jake had assembled not just the club, but a network of contacts built over years of living and working in the community. Tommy knew a roofing contractor who owed him a favor. Big Tom worked construction and had access to materials at cost. Carlos, the accountant, started a spreadsheet of everything needed and began calling in donations. Marcus worked at a hardware store and convinced his manager to contribute supplies. But first, they needed to understand the full scope. Tuesday morning, 5 club members and 3 contractors walked through Dorothy's house with notebooks and cameras, documenting everything. The roof needed complete replacement. The foundation had cracks. The plumbing was a disaster. The electrical system was outdated and dangerous. The furnace was one cold night away from death. The porch needed to be rebuilt. The windows needed replacing. The siding was rotting. Carlos ran the numbers. Professionally, this is a $150,000 job, minimum. The room went quiet. "We don't have that," Jake said. "No, but we have labor. We have connections. We have people who owe us favors." Carlos looked up from his spreadsheet. "If we do the work ourselves, call in every favor, get materials at cost or donated, I think we can do it for $30,000. "We don't have $30,000 either." "No, but we can raise it, and we can start with what we do have." The club treasury had $4,000. Money saved for emergencies, for members who needed help, for the occasional charity event. They voted to use all of it. Tommy's roofing contractor agreed to donate materials if the club did the labor. Big Tom's construction company donated lumber. Marcus's hardware store gave them a 30% discount and agreed to let them pay over time. But they needed more. They needed the community. Jake Morrison had never asked for help before. Pride ran deep in the club. They were the ones who helped others, who showed up when nobody else would. Asking felt wrong. But this was for Dorothy. And Dorothy had taught him something about pride. Sometimes you had to set it aside. He started with the hospital where Dorothy had worked, called the main number, asked for administration, explained the situation. The woman on the phone was quiet for a moment. "Dorothy Walsh? From the ER?" "Yes, ma'am." "Hold, please." 5 minutes later, a different voice came on the line. "This is Margaret Chen, Director of Nursing. You're calling about Dorothy Walsh?" Jake explained again. The diner, the $10, the house, what they wanted to do. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick. "Dorothy Walsh saved my daughter's life. 16 years ago. My daughter had a severe allergic reaction at a restaurant. The ambulance brought her in, and she was coding. Dorothy was the intake nurse. She recognized what was happening before the doctors did, started treatment immediately. My daughter is 23 now. She's alive because Dorothy didn't hesitate." "I didn't know," Jake said. "Dorothy wouldn't have told you. That was just Tuesday for her, just another shift. But it was everything to me. What do you need?" "Money, materials, volunteers, anything." "You'll have it. I'll send an email to every nurse who worked with Dorothy, and I'll make a personal donation. Give me your information." The email went out Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, Jake's phone wouldn't stop ringing. A nurse named Patricia. "Dorothy talked me through my first trauma case. I was 23 and terrified. She held my hand and told me I could do it. I'm in for $500. A doctor named Rahman. "Dorothy caught a medication error I made my first year. She was kind about it, taught me to double-check everything. She saved my career and probably saved lives. I'm donating $1,000 and I'll come help with construction." A former patient named James. "I was in a car accident in 1998. Dorothy was the first person I saw when I woke up. She held my hand and told me I was going to be okay. She stayed past her shift to make sure I wasn't alone. I'm in for $2,000. The stories kept coming. 40 years of small kindnesses. 40 years of Dorothy Walsh showing up, doing her job with compassion and skill, touching lives, and moving on to the next patient, never expecting recognition or reward. By Thursday, they had $18,000 in donations. By Friday, $26,000. People offered materials, labor, food for the workers. A local restaurant pledged to provide lunch every day of construction. A lumber yard donated flooring. A plumbing company offered to do all the plumbing work for free. On Saturday morning, 1 week after Jake had first knocked on Dorothy's door, he returned with a folder full of pledges and plans. Dorothy opened the door, looking tired but hopeful. "I've been watching the news," she said quietly. "People are calling me, people I haven't talked to in years. They're saying you started something." "You started it," Jake said. 40 years ago, We're just finishing it." He opened the folder, showed her the numbers, the donations, the volunteers, the timeline. "We start Monday. We'll have the roof done in a week, plumbing and electrical the week after, foundation work, windows, siding, porch. We're looking at 6 weeks total. Maybe 8. Dorothy sat down heavily in her chair. "I can't believe this is real." "It's real, but there's one condition." She looked up, worried. "You can't stay here during construction. It's not safe. We need you somewhere warm and dry while we work." "I don't have anywhere to go." "Yes, you do." Jake pulled out another paper. "Margaret Chen, the director of nursing at the hospital. She's offered you her guest house, free, for as long as you need." Dorothy's hands shook as she took the paper. "Margaret Chen. I remember her daughter. The allergic reaction. That was years ago." "She remembers you? A lot of people remember you, Dorothy. You just didn't know it." The tears came again, but this time they were different. Not tears of breaking, tears of something being rebuilt. "When do I move?" she asked. "Today. We'll help you pack." The construction began Monday morning at 7 a.m. 15 members of the Iron Brotherhood showed up, along with 23 volunteers from the hospital, 12 from the community, and 6 professional contractors who'd agreed to supervise and help. They started with the roof, stripped the old shingles, replaced rotted decking, installed new weatherproofing. Tommy supervised, his years of experience evident in every instruction. By Friday, the house had a new roof, solid, sealed, ready for winter. Week 2 brought the plumbers and electricians. They ripped out old pipes, replaced corroded fittings, updated the electrical panel, rewired dangerous circuits. Dr. Rahman worked alongside them, learning as he went, his surgeon's hands surprisingly adept at threading wire. Week 3 focused on the foundation. They jacked up the sagging corner, poured new concrete, reinforced the supports. Big Tom led this effort, his construction background invaluable. Week 4 brought windows and insulation. The old single-pane windows came out, replaced with new double-pane units. They blew insulation into the walls, sealed every crack and gap. The house began to feel solid, protected. Week 5 was the furnace and plumbing fixtures. A new high-efficiency furnace installed by a heating contractor who'd been treated by Dorothy after a work accident. New kitchen and bathroom fixtures donated by a supplier whose mother had been Dorothy's patient. Week 6 brought finish work. New flooring in the kitchen and bathroom. Fresh drywall where needed. Paint throughout, colors chosen by Dorothy from samples Jake brought to Margaret's guest house. Week 7 was the porch. They rebuilt it from the ground up, new posts and beams, new decking, new railings. Carlos designed it, Marcus helped build it, and when it was done, it looked like the porch from Dorothy's old photos, the one from when she and Henry had first bought the house. Week 8 was details. Landscaping, new gutters, a wheelchair ramp, because Jake insisted, "You're 78. Plan ahead." Light fixtures. A new front door, solid and secure. Throughout it all, Dorothy visited twice a week. Margaret would drive her over, and Dorothy would walk through with Jake, seeing the progress, crying at each new improvement. "I don't deserve this," she said more than once. "Yes, you do," Jake told her every time. "You've deserved this for 40 years. On a Saturday morning in January, 8 weeks after construction began, Jake Morrison knocked on the door of Margaret Chen's guest house. Dorothy answered, dressed and ready. She'd been packed for 3 days, too excited to wait. "It's time," Jake said. The drive to Maple Street took 10 minutes. When they turned onto her street, Dorothy gasped. Cars lined both sides of the road, motorcycles too. People stood in her yard, on her new porch, in the street. 50 people, maybe more. Jake parked, helped Dorothy out. The crowd parted as she walked toward her house. The transformation was complete. The house looked like it had in 1972, when she and Henry had first seen it. Fresh paint, pale yellow with white trim, exactly like the original. The porch gleamed, solid and welcoming. New windows reflected the winter sun. The roof was perfect, the gutters clean, the yard landscaped. A banner hung across the porch. "Welcome home, Dorothy." She stopped at the bottom of the new steps, overwhelmed. Jake stood beside her. "There's more," he said quietly. He led her up the steps, solid, no creaking, no fear of breaking through. Through the new front door, into her house. The interior took her breath away, fresh paint throughout, refinished hardwood floors, new light fixtures. The furniture had been cleaned and repaired. The kitchen had new appliances, donated by a restaurant supply company whose owner had been treated by Dorothy after a heart attack. But it was the living room that broke her. The hospital bed was gone, replaced by a new couch and chairs. But on the wall hung something that hadn't been there before, a massive collage of photos and notes. Dorothy walked closer, reading through tears. Photos of patients she'd treated over the years, many she'd forgotten, notes from nurses she'd trained, letters from families thanking her for kindness during their worst moments. A photo of Margaret Chen's daughter at her college graduation with a note, "Alive because of you." In the center, a plaque. Dorothy Walsh, 40 years of service, countless lives touched, one life transformed. She turned to find the room full of people, nurses from the hospital, former patients, community members, the Iron Brotherhood, all watching her with love. Margaret Chen stepped forward. "You gave your life to helping others. Now we're giving back. This house is yours, free and clear. The back taxes are paid. We've set up a fund to cover your property taxes for the next 10 years, your utilities for the next 5 years. And there's money left over for whatever you need." Dorothy couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Jake Morrison came to stand beside her. "You gave me your last $10. We wanted to give you something back." "This is too much," Dorothy whispered. "No," Jake said. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough, but it's what we could do." Tommy stepped forward, leaning on his cane. "I was in the VA hospital in 1971, messed up from the war. A nurse sat with me through a bad night, talked me down when I was ready to do something stupid. I didn't remember her name until I saw your picture. It was you, Dorothy. You saved my life 50 years ago." A woman in her 40s came forward. "You delivered my baby in the ER in 1994, didn't make it to the maternity ward. You caught him, made sure he was breathing, held my hand. He's 28 now, a teacher." One by one they came forward. Stories from 40 years. Lives saved, hands held, kindnesses given, and never forgotten. Dorothy Walsh stood in her rebuilt house, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, and understood finally what she'd been too humble to see before. She hadn't been poor. She'd been rich beyond measure. Rich in the lives she'd touched, the people she'd helped, the love she'd given freely without expecting return. And now, in her time of need, that wealth had come back to her. The party lasted hours. Food appeared, platters and casseroles and desserts. Music played. People laughed and cried and shared stories. The Iron Brotherhood stood guard on the porch, making sure Dorothy's new home was protected, making sure she was safe. As the sun set and people began to leave, Jake found Dorothy sitting on her new porch, wrapped in a warm coat, watching the street. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you," Jake replied, "for showing me what kindness looks like, for giving your last $10 to a stranger, for 40 years of showing up. I just did my job." "No, you did more than that. You cared. You saw people. You helped without expecting anything back. That's not a job. That's a calling. That's a life well lived." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Henry would have loved this. He always said I gave too much away. But he understood. He knew it was just who I was. He'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you too, you and your club. People see the leather and the motorcycles and they make assumptions. But you're good men. You saw someone who needed help and you didn't just give money. You gave time, you gave skill, you gave heart. We learn from the best, Jake said. As the last visitors left and the street grew quiet, Dorothy stood at her front door, looking into her transformed home. Warm, safe, solid, everything she'd needed but been too proud to ask for. Jake and the last few club members prepared to leave. "Wait," Dorothy said. She went inside, returned with something in her hand. Jake's $10 bill. She'd kept it all these weeks. "I want you to have this back," she said. "Frame it. Keep it. Remember what it means." Jake took it carefully. "What does it mean?" "That kindness is never wasted, that what we give comes back, that we're all connected in ways we can't see until we need to." She smiled. "And that sometimes the biggest gifts come from the smallest acts." Jake looked at the bill, then at Dorothy, then at the house behind her, the house that had been rebuilt by a community coming together, sparked by one act of generosity. "I'll keep it," he said, "and I'll remember." 3 months later, on a cold February morning, Dorothy Walsh walked into Rosie's diner for the first time since that November day. She ordered coffee and pie, and when Rosie brought the check, Dorothy left a $20 tip. "Dorothy," Rosie said, surprised, "this is too much." "No," Dorothy said, smiling. "It's exactly right. Someone taught me that giving is never too much. It's just what you do when you can." She left the diner and walked the 14 blocks home, not because she had to save bus fare, but because she wanted to, because the morning was beautiful and her knees felt good, and her house was waiting. The house on Maple Street stood solid and warm, a testament to what happens when kindness ripples outward, when communities come together, when people see past appearances to the heart beneath. And on the porch, hanging beside the door, was a small plaque that Jake had installed without telling her. It read, "Home of Dorothy Walsh, 40 years of service, 1 act of kindness, infinite return." Dorothy touched it gently as she went inside, into the warmth, into the home that love had rebuilt. She'd given away her last $10 to a stranger on a cold November day, and the world had given her everything back.